I thought becoming a backup dancer for one of Hollywood's biggest stars would be the start of everything I'd worked for. And in a way, it was. But not in the way I imagined. It didn't lead to fame or fortune. It led me into something I can't fully explain. Something I still see in the corners of my life today. It began with a smile. It ended with a door I'll never open again. And in between was the audition.
The message didn't just sit in my inbox. It glowed. My name was printed in clean black letters against the white screen, but it felt like it was engraved in gold. I'd been in this industry long enough to know how rare a break like this was. Most dancers live in constant motion, moving from one audition to another, trying to hold together a life that could fall apart with a single bad week. This wasn't just another job. This was Tom Cruise's production. I'd trained for years in rooms where the mirrors were cracked at the edges and the floors were warped from overuse. I'd danced through sprained ankles, bad lighting, sound systems that hissed like static. Now, the rehearsal space I stepped into looked like a cathedral for movement. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, each one so clean they reflected even the smallest gestures. The light was bright but controlled, falling in even pools that made the whole room feel like a stage. Even before I saw him, I could feel that subtle electric hum that comes when someone important is about to enter. The music had been playing through the speakers, a steady beat to keep the group in sync. But as the side door swung open, that beat seemed to dim. The sound system didn't falter, it was us. Our rhythm shifted. The crew's banter thinned. He walked in wearing nothing that screamed movie star, just a fitted black shirt, track pants, and sneakers. But the air changed. It wasn't the kind of attention you get from being famous. It was gravitational. Your eyes went to him whether you wanted to or not. And as he moved past each person, they straightened just slightly, adjusting their posture without realizing it.
When his gaze passed over me, it was quick, almost casual. But in that blink of a moment, it felt like he'd taken some kind of inventory. Not of what I was wearing or how I stood, but of something more internal. Like he was scanning for potential or weakness. It didn't happen all at once. That's what I noticed. It started small. Tiny moments tucked into the cracks of the workday. The first time I had been resetting props between sequences, moving a low rolling platform back into its mark. I'd measured my steps carefully, trying to keep my focus, when I caught his voice cutting across the room, loud enough for every ear to catch it. Easy there, wouldn't want to knock over the set before opening night.
It landed like a joke, wrapped in just enough charm to keep people laughing. And they did laugh. Crew, other dancers, even the choreographer. I laughed too, because that's what you're supposed to do. But the laughter felt rehearsed, like a cue we'd all been waiting for.
As the days passed, these moments grew more precise. They weren't random teases. They were perfectly timed interruptions that always left me slightly off balance. If I finished my section early, he'd comment on my Olympic speed. If I took an extra breath before starting again, it was saving your energy for the after party. None of it was overtly cruel, but every word was calculated to be public. It didn't matter if he was across the room, people heard him. And each time, I could feel the ripple of glances in my direction, the subtle shift in how others spoke to me afterward. Then the errands began. They weren't requests anyone else seemed to get. Fetching a specific piece of wardrobe without knowing where it was stored. Tracking down a person I'd never met who turned out to be in another building entirely. I'd return, breathless from hurrying, only to be met with a raised eyebrow and a quiet, "That took longer than I thought." A comment that didn't need to be shouted. The way it was said was enough.
I started keeping mental notes of these moments, not out of paranoia, but because a pattern was emerging, one I didn't understand yet. The comment that cracked it open came from someone I barely knew. It was after hours, the rehearsal room empty except for me and one of the older crew members. He passed behind me without breaking stride, muttering just loud enough for me to hear. "You're being groomed for something." I turned, ready to ask what he meant, but he was already gone, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. From that day on, I couldn't stop watching for signs, and I saw them everywhere, not just in him, but in the people around him. The way conversations seemed to pivot the moment he walked into a room. The way people adjusted, physically, emotionally, like they were slipping into a pre-approved mode of behavior. The change in how others treated me was subtle, but unmistakable. At first, there had been casual invites, lunch runs, coffee breaks, small talk about other jobs we'd done. But those moments evaporated. Now, when I entered the break room, the room grew quieter, eyes sliding away as though they were afraid of being caught in the wrong conversation. And then came the envelope. It was after a long day, the kind that left your muscles heavy and your thoughts dull. I was gathering my bag when a producer stepped out from behind the curtain. He didn't greet me with the usual casual grin. His smile was slower, measured. In his hand was a thick white envelope, unmarked, weighty. He held it out like it was either an opportunity or a sentence. "Join us for drinks after rehearsal," he said. And though the words were framed like an offer, they landed like an instruction. When I asked who us was, his smile didn't change. "You'll see." We didn't head toward the exit. Instead, the producer's hand brushed my shoulder lightly, steering me toward the far side of the rehearsal complex. The air in this part of the building felt different, cooler, heavier. The walls here weren't painted in the bright motivational colors of the main rooms. They were a muted, shadowed gray, the kind of color you'd never notice unless you were alone in it. Our footsteps echoed, but not in a normal way. The sound seemed swallowed almost as soon as it left the floor, like the hallway itself didn't want to carry the noise forward. We passed closed doors. No labels, no signs of life. The longer we walked, the more I realized I'd never been down this stretch before, even though I'd worked here for weeks. At the end of the hall was a single unmarked door. The brass handle gleamed faintly under the low light, polished smooth from years of use. The producer didn't knock. He turned it and pushed it open slowly, as if entering a place where speed wasn't allowed. Inside, the first thing that hit me wasn't sight. It was smell. Warm, faintly metallic, with an undertone I couldn't name. Not unpleasant, but deeply out of place in a building like this. The lighting was low, golden, the kind that seemed to pool rather than fill the room, leaving the corners in a perpetual dusk. A long table dominated the center of the space, its surface polished to a glass-like shine. The wood was dark, the grain almost black under the flickering light. Every chair was identical, high-backed, narrow, but one was empty, positioned directly opposite the head of the table.
Tom was already there. No cameras, no rehearsal clothes, no public grin. His presence felt sharper here, more concentrated, as if the absence of an audience had stripped away the outer layer and left something distilled.
Around the table sat faces I recognized from the periphery of the production, producers, coordinators, each with the same neutral, unreadable expression. Among them were two strangers in dark suits, people I'd never seen on set. Their eyes were fixed, calm, but there was a weight in the way they watched, as if they were measuring me before I'd even spoken. One of the strangers raised a glass filled with a clear liquid. "To the circle," he said. The others echoed the toast, lifting their glasses in perfect unison before taking a slow, deliberate sip. No one offered me a drink. The door opened again, without a sound, and a figure stepped in, head lowered, carrying a silver tray as though it were something sacred. On it sat a single porcelain cup, covered by a thin white veil. The figure placed it in front of me without looking up. "This," Tom said, his voice low, "is your last step, your last test." The figure lifted the veil with a slow, almost reverent motion. The cup held a liquid so dark it seemed to draw the light into itself. It didn't swirl, didn't ripple, even as it sat there. Candlelight glanced off its surface in faint, fleeting crimson tones, just enough to hint at color, but never enough to name it.
The scent rose slowly, subtle at first, then undeniable, metallic, with a sweetness buried underneath, the way fruit can smell when it's just past ripe. The air around me felt stiller, like the room was waiting for me to move.
"That's all you have to do," Tom said softly. "Drink."
His eyes stayed on mine, unwavering. Around the table, no one shifted. No one blinked. My hand stayed in my lap, my fingers pressing into the fabric of my pants. "I can't," I said finally, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. The reaction was instant, but not loud. He drew his palm up and brought it down flat against the table. The sound cracked through the silence, sharp enough to make the silverware jump. The candle flames quivered but didn't go out. What was in his gaze then wasn't frustration. It wasn't disappointment. It was something I'd felt before without ever naming. Something that had been watching me from the first day I stepped into rehearsal. And now it was visible, unmasked. I stood, pushing my chair back. The scrape of wood on the floor sounded too loud in the silence. I moved toward the door, walking backwards so I didn't have to break his stare. The distance between us stayed the same, no matter how far I moved. Only when my hand found the cold brass handle did I blink. And when I stepped out, the air in the hallway felt thin, almost cold, as if I'd crossed into a different season entirely. The ride should have been forgettable. Just highway lines sliding under tires and city light turning into nothing. But the closer we got, the more the world felt like it was losing its static. The windshield framed a stretch of road that looked washed, like someone had run a cloth over the horizon. The driver never asked my name, never adjusted the radio, never checked the mirror. He had the calm of someone who knew the route by muscle memory and the destination by something deeper. When we passed through the first gate, the air thinned. By the second gate, it changed temperature. It didn't get colder or warmer, it just stopped matching the night outside. Like a climate of its own had been pulled up over the property and zipped shut. The driveway curled through manicured trees that were too evenly spaced to be casual and too still to be alive. The leaves didn't turn or flicker, not even when the SUV crept by. Each branch sat at a studied angle, every bloom held at its most flattering openness. A garden paused in the middle of a performance it had rehearsed for years. The tires hummed over stone. The hum didn't echo off the house. It soaked in. The facade rose up slowly. Arched windows, pale walls, vines trained to look accidental. Nothing here looked expensive in the loud way. It looked inevitable, like the building had decided it would exist a century before anyone signed the deed. The door opened without a bell or a handle turn. A girl, 16 maybe, stood there in a gray uniform that wasn't a uniform. It was the idea of one. No name tag, no house seal. She didn't smile, didn't offer a hand, just dipped her head 1 degree and stepped aside the way doors step aside. Inside, sound disappeared. Not softened. Disappeared. Shoes didn't click. Clothes didn't brush. Even my breath felt edited, as if the house had a filter that removed anything that didn't belong. The hallway we entered was narrow and tall, a throat of warm light. Along the walls, photographs that weren't staged and weren't candid either. People mid-turn, mid-thought, mid-breath, captured at angles that told you more than you wanted. No plaques, no captions. I knew none of the faces, and I knew all of them in the way you know a story before someone tells it. The girl walked ahead without checking if I followed. The carpet didn't give underfoot. It accepted. We turned twice, then once more, and arrived at a sunroom that wasn't bright with sun. Golden light sat in it like a presence. Thick, patient, not moving across the floor or the wall. A single cushioned chair, a small table, a pitcher beating small drops of condensation that did not fall. The glass was empty and waiting. I poured water to have something to do with my hands. The lemon rose from the glass, sharp, clean, and then dulled mid-inhale, like the scent itself had been asked to lower its voice. No clocks, no TV, no whir from a hidden vent. I realized there wasn't a single blinking light anywhere. No tiny indicators of systems thinking in the walls. Time wasn't passing in here. It was being kept somewhere else until it was needed. I was about to set the glass down when the room shifted pressure, the way old houses do before a storm. She didn't enter. She was simply in the room, standing at the threshold as if the wall had forgotten it was wall for 1 second and let her through. The clothes were plain. Soft gray sweater, relaxed slacks, slippers that made no sound, and somehow more precise than an evening gown. Her face held that quiet, practiced joy you've seen 1,000 times. But here the tone was lower, the tempo slower, as though the voice had been tuned to the room's frequency. "Thank you for coming," she said, and the words didn't bounce off tile or glass. They found my ribs and stayed. We walked a hallway I hadn't seen from the other side. The sconces gave off light that didn't travel far, and each shadow had its own logic. Some stretched toward the light, some ignored it. The corridor felt longer than the outside of the house would have allowed. A trick of angles or an arrangement of space that didn't care about geometry. When the room opened, the table was already dressed for a quiet ritual. Dark wood polished so smooth the candles seemed to float in the reflection. 2 chairs set far enough apart to make every word deliberate. 2 glasses that showed no seams. A bottle with no label, no servers, no staff, no motion in the periphery to imply there ever would be. She gestured for me to sit, and I sat. The cushion had the exact resistance of memory foam, and not an ounce more. My knees aligned with the table's edge as if the chair had known my height in advance. The candles held steady flames, Thin, exact, unwavering, like tiny metronomes with their ticks removed. I tried to find something ordinary, a nick in the wood, a wax drip, a faint scratch where a glass had been set too hard. There was none. The table had no history. It had function.
Her eyes didn't search me. They took inventory and then waited. In rooms like this, people make the mistake of filling silence. I didn't. The quiet in here wasn't empty. It was dense. The kind of quiet that arrives when a room has rehearsed itself down to a single purpose. And that purpose is you.